Yes students, welcome to our video lecture. And today, now from this lecture onwards, we are going to start classification of qualitative data. So today's topic is classification of qualitative data. Now students, based on two types of data available, quantitative data and qualitative data, there are two types of classification. Classification of quantitative data already we have studied. Now students, we are going to study classification of qualitative data. So first of all, our first definition is classification of qualitative data. The process of systematic arrangement of qualitative data or attributes. Students, pay attention. The process of systematic arrangement of qualitative data or attributes in the form of rows and columns on the basis of standards of classification is called classification of qualitative data. The process of systematic arrangement of attributes or qualitative data in the form of rows and columns on the basis of standard of classification is called classification of qualitative data. Or in simpler terms, you can even write like this: the process of systematically arranging qualitative data in the form of rows and columns or in the form of table is called classification of qualitative data. Generally, qualitative data, students, is always arranged in the form of rows and columns, and whenever we consider rows and columns, it is nothing but a table. So once again, the process of systematically arranging qualitative data or attributes in the form of rows and columns on the basis of standard of classification is called classification of qualitative data. Now, in the classification of qualitative data, we have two types of classification. First is simple classification or table, and second is multiple or manifold classification or table. So this is again, students, divided into two types. One is simple classification or table, and second is multiple classification or table. Multiple classification is also called manifold classification or table. So students perfectly understand once again what is classification of qualitative data. The process of systematically arranging qualitative data or attributes in the form of rows and columns, that is table, on the basis of standard of classification is called classification of qualitative data. In the classification of qualitative data, we have two types: simple classification or table and multiple classification or table. Multiple classification is also called manifold classification. Now students, pay attention. What is simple classification? A classification prepared on the basis of one attribute or quality is called simple classification. A classification based on only one attribute or characteristics is called simple classification, and a classification based on two or more attributes is called multiple classification, or students it is also called manifold classification. So there are two types of classification in the classification of qualitative data. First is simple classification and second is multiple classification. A classification which is based on one attribute is called simple classification, and a classification which is based on two or more attributes is called multiple classification or manifold classification. So I think this should be very clear. Once again I am repeating the theories. First of all, what is classification of qualitative data? The process of systematically arranging qualitative data or attributes in the form of rows and columns on the basis of standard of classification is called classification of qualitative data. There are two types of classification of qualitative data. One is simple classification and other is multiple or manifold classification. What is simple classification? A classification which is based on only one attribute or characteristics is called simple classification. And what is multiple or manifold classification? A classification which is based on two or more attributes is called multiple or manifold classification. So I advise this to write, I advise you to write three definitions. First is classification of qualitative data, second is simple classification, and third is multiple or manifold classification. Now, types of tabulation and its uses that we will do next time, students, so that you need not worry in terms of theory. So, after deciding the standard of classification, qualitative data or quantitative data arranged in the form of rows and columns, and that is table. So, you need not worry, students, about this theories at the time. Now, students, we are going to do the sums of tabulation. We are going to do the sums of classification of qualitative data. Qualitative data usually you can say arranged in terms of table. And for this topic, students, we do not have any formula. This is purely, students, based on your general knowledge. This is purely, students, based on your general knowledge. So one has to be very attentive and careful while doing, students, this type of sums. So now, students, I am starting after a very long time a new exercise, and that exercise is, students, exercise 2.2. So all of you please concentrate. We are doing the first two sums of exercise 2.2. There were 1400 students studying in a commerce college. Now, before doing or before starting a fair table, we have to prepare a rough table, and that rough table is called, students, analysis of the data. So, students, I am starting exercise 2.2, main question 1. A rough table is called, students, analysis of the data. There were 1400 students in a commerce college. So total number of students were 1400. Among them, 855 were boys, and of them, 225 boys were in the second year. So, students, Pay attention. Boys studying in first year, second year, third year, of course, and girls. So if I divide this total number of students into two categories, definitely we will have boys and girls. In this type of sums, students, you should very carefully understand what type of data is given. One should very carefully understand what type of data is given. 855 boys. So if I have 855 boys, definitely students, 1400 minus 855. So this will be 45 and this will become 30. So definitely 545 girls. You should easily understand this. So in the analysis of the data, students, we have to go at ease. So once again, total there were 1400 students studying in a college, out of which 855 were boys. So 1400 minus 855 are 545, and definitely 545 will be the girls. And of 855 boys, 225 boys were in the second year. Okay, so boys, this is divided into three more categories. First year, second year, and third year. Same thing here. Girls divided into three categories. First year, second year, and of course third year. So 225 boys were in the second year. Then in the second year, the number of boys and number of girls are equal. So what does this mean? In the second year, number of boys and number of girls are equal. So if there are 225 boys, girls will be also 225. So number of students in the second year will be 225 plus 225, which is how much? 450. Among 550 students of the first year, so first year total is 550. Correct? The proportion of boys and girls was 3:2. Proportion of boys and girls was 3:2. So ratio is given. So total of 3 and 2 is 5. So number of boys will be 3 by 5 into 550. 5 ones are 5, 11 are. So this is 330. Number of girls will be 2 by 5 into 550. 5 ones are 5, 11 are. So this is 220. Or even 550 minus 330 will give you 220. Both the ways you can do. Then in the third year, number of boys is 3 times the number of girls. So if I suppose number of girls is x, number of boys will be 3x. Now, easily we can find x. The total of all these 3 must be 545. X plus 225 plus 220 is equal to 545. This is 445 is equal to 545. So x will be 545 minus 445, 100. So this is 300. that's all. Check the total will match. 330 plus 300 will be 630 plus 225 will be 855. So in short, in this type of sums, students, we have to find out the hidden data by analysis of the data. And after doing students analysis of the data, we can easily prepare the table. So a rough table is prepared first, and that rough table is called students analysis of the data. Now students, we need to prepare the table, and every table will have a title. So what will be the title? Table showing. Every table will bear an appropriate title. Table showing classification of students of a commerce college according to their sex and year of study. Whenever students, even you can write according to their gender. Okay, let us write gender also. According to gender, year of study. So students, we have to be very careful, because every table is given an appropriate title. In statistics, check whenever we had prepared a frequency distribution, there also we had given a title. So every table is given an appropriate title in the study of a frequency distribution. And in the same way, whenever we are preparing a table in terms of classification of qualitative data, that is also given an appropriate title. So this is our table. Now, which columns to make? Girls and boys. So this attributes right here. Girls and boys, and then you will write total. And here you will write year of study. Isn't it? Or even we can write according to genders. I put that gender, then also it is correct. See students, I can do like this also. There is no such thumb rule. Gender, and then I can divide and write boys and girls. Then also it is as so write first year, second year, third year, and then again I will write total. We always facilitate horizontal total, and this is vertical total, and this is the horizontal totals. So in the first year, how many boys were there? Boys and first year 330, girls were 220. So boys are 330, girls were 220, total is 550. In second year, boys and girls were equal, 225, 225, so 450. In third year, boys were 300 and girls were 100. So total is, you can say, yes, here it is 450, here it is 550, correct. So this will be 400. Total of this will be 1400. 100. How many boys were there? 855. How many girls were there? 545. This horizontal total and vertical total must match, otherwise the table is wrong. So, in this type of sum, students, we don't have any prescribed formula. It is purely based on your general knowledge. So you have to be very careful, students, in doing the sums of this type. This is the main part of the sum analysis of the data. This is called rough table. This analysis is specifically done to find out the hidden information. Okay, students, we will go for sum number 2. Every table must have an appropriate title. So, students, answer 2, analysis of the data. Now, the table is like this. 1600 employees are working in an office. This is the sum. Okay. So, total number of employees are 1600. Students, this is Y. Okay, among this, the number of men exceeded the number of women by 15%. Okay, of course. So this is divided into men and women. Okay. The number of unmarried employees and married employees. Okay. So men, we divide this into married and unmarried. Women, we divide it into 2. Married and unmarried, or married, unmarried, and you can write men, women. Same thing, is not at all difficult. Now, total employees were 1600. Among these employees, the number of men exceeded the number of women by 50% of the total number of employees. Number of men exceeded the number of women by 50. Suppose number of women is X. Now 50% of total employees is equal to 15 by 100 into 1600. This gets cancelled, so this is 240. 15 are 225 plus 15, so 240. It means if women were X, men were X plus 240. This is what is given. I told you again and again, students, in this type of sums. I am telling again and again, in this type of sums, we do not have a formula. Your formulas are your all basic general knowledge mathematical concepts which you have studied from standard 4 to standard 10. So now it is very simple. If I add x number of women and x plus 40 number of men, total is 1600. So 2x is equal to 1600 minus 240. So this is equal to 1360. So x will be 1360 divided by 2, 2 6 are 12, 2 is 680. So number of women are 680 plus 240. 680 plus 200 is 880. 40 is 920. So number of men are 920, number of women are 680. We got this is based on your general knowledge. You should know how to find percentage. 15% of total employees is 15 upon 100 is 1600 and that is 240. Then the number of unmarried employees are 800 less than the number of married employees. So if I suppose married employees are Y, then the number of unmarried employees are 800 less than the married employees. So unmarried employees will be Y minus 800. Number of unmarried employees are 800 less than the married employees. Total employees, again I total this, Y plus Y minus 800 will be 1600. So twice Y is equal to 2400. So Y is equal to 1200. So total of married employees is 1200. So married men and women are 1200. Unmarried men and women are 1200 minus 800, which is 400. The number of unmarried women is 125. So this is given as 195. So that's all. So how many married women we will have? 680 minus 195. 680 and 195. So this will change to 5, this will change to 17, this is 5, this is 8, and this is 4. So this will be 485. Married women. Total this 5 plus 5, 10, 8, and this will be 680. Now 1200 minus 500 is how much? 700. And this 5, so 715. Maybe you can say married men. Now this will be 205. Unmarried men, because both the total is 400. So 400 minus 185 will be 205. 1200 minus 485 will give us 750. So simple mathematics is at work, which is not based in terms of formulas. So one has to be students very cautious in understanding this type of questions. So analysis is done. Now simply students we have to prepare a table. Table showing classification of employees or employees according to gender and marital status. Table showing classification of employees according to their gender and marital status. It's married or unmarried. Table is very simple. So here we have status. Here we have gender, male and female or men, women. Okay, total. Here married, here unmarried, and then total. Okay, how many married men and married? So 750. How many married women? 485. total is definitely right. Red. How many? Unmarried men 205. Unmarried women 195. The total is 400. This is 1600. How many men were there? 920. How many women were there? 680. So in this type of sums, we facilitate vertical total, column and row total, so that we can get more information from the table. And again I am repeating, analysis of the data does not have any formula. It is based on your general mathematics, regarding which you should be very perfect. So students, as we have started the tabulation concepts, we go very slow. Today I am going to teach you only these two sums. Once again, theory. What is classification of qualitative data? The method of systematically arranging attributes or qualitative data in the form of rows and columns based on the standard of classification is called classification of qualitative data. There are two types of classification of qualitative data. One is simple classification or table, and other is multiple or manifold classification or table. What is simple classification? A classification based on only one attribute is called simple classification. What is multiple or manifold classification? A classification which is based on two or more attributes is called multiple or manifold classification. Tabulation is systematically arranging the qualitative data or quantitative data in the form of rows and columns. But for this, we do not have any prescribed formula. The main part of the table is analysis of the data, which is called rough data, to find out the hidden information. So try to do this, some students do this twice. The remaining will be continued in the next